we can't just look at the future. We have 14 years of underpayment in the past, and in total, millions of temporary agency workers that have been underpaid. And that would account for many billions of euros of missed wages.
Follow the money.
Every day, thousands of migrant workers from countries like Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland and Ukraine work in greenhouses and slaughterhouses in the Netherlands. But employment agencies may have breached EU law and underpaid their workers for years. Today I'm joined by Follow the Money journalist Lise Witteman, who's also founder of its Brussels desk. And Lise found that these agencies may now have to pay back billions of euros to temporary workers. Welcome, Lise.
Hi.
Welcome in the Amsterdam studio.
Thank you.
To set the scene of what we're talking about today, for us as Dutch people, it's very well known that the Netherlands runs on flex workers. But for people that are not familiar with this phenomenon, can you share a bit more about this concept of the Netherlands as a country that runs on flex workers? What do they do in the Netherlands?
Yeah, they actually do a lot. I think at its peak, we had around 1 million workers a year working in a temporary agency workers. Well, as you know, the Netherlands is not a very big country, so this is already quite a big part of its labor market. And they work in logistics, in food, in agriculture. It used to be, and it should be, only for like seasonal work, or for instance, when people have to stop working for a while because they get a child, and then you need a bit of workforce to step in, like flexible labor. But over time, in the Netherlands especially, we've seen that because these workers have been cheaper in the Netherlands, it has been more and more exploited, and it has been replacing ordinary jobs. They are really driving the Dutch economy.
And so the economy as a whole is very much profiting from these temporary workers from different European countries. But who else than the economy in general really profits from these people doing these jobs?
These are the agencies that mostly see profit as in these low wage workers, and to employ them and also to exploit them, to be fair, in these lower wage jobs, in especially indeed the greenhouses, agriculture, slaughterhouses, those kind of positions.
What sort of numbers are we talking about here?
It is not so easy to really find exact numbers on this, but indeed in the peak years and in the last years we've seen that it is around 1 million workers that works in the temporary agency workers, with the majority being labor migrants. And I think if you look at the sector overall, around 2008 there was a small peak already, and then the revenue of this whole sector was around 10 billion euros, and in the last years, in recent years, it has peaked at within like 30-40 billion euros. So it's really a booming sector in that regard.
At the same time, we have seen quite a lot of scandals. You also mentioned exploitation before. That has been in the news over and over again. What you have now found is that, in fact, there has been a structural wrongdoing against labor migrants. What exactly did you find out about that?
So what we've learned is that temporary agency workers overall are paid less than ordinary workers. So for this, we actually have to go back to 2020 with the whole COVID pandemic. Together with a lot of other European journalists for an investigation that was coordinated by Lighthouse Reports, we looked into the situation of labor migrants all over Europe. And of course, we saw a lot of people that worked in illegal circumstances and therefore had no certainty at all. When I was looking at my own country, the Netherlands, I found that actually it was a regulated situation. Labor migration, temporary work was a regulated sector. And yet there was a lot of underpayment and abuse. And I was looking...
So when you say regulated sector, you mean that in theory, the rules on paper are fine?
Yes. And especially when I looked at European legislation, I saw that there was a rule that said you have to pay temporary agency workers the same as normal workers. So if I would, for instance, go and pluck tomatoes in a greenhouse in the Netherlands as a Dutch person, and I'm hired through this tomato company, I would earn the same as a labor migrant that would indeed be also hired through an agency. Yeah. So we would get the same amount of money.
And on top of that, also holidays, insurance.
Yes, and maybe certain bonuses or profits, leaves, all these kind of things. So that is what the European legislation says. And then I found that there's also a kind of loophole, or you can derogate from this principle also according to European law that says, yes, this is the principle, but if there's a collective labor agreement around temporary agencies, then that collective labor agreement allows for lesser pay, then that's also okay.
So we have European law, but if there's a collective labor agreement that says something different, then it's okay to sort of like deviate from that European law.
Yeah.
And that's why you thought, okay.
And I thought, okay, well, apparently that is the situation. Then I understand why temporary agencies have become so profitable in the Netherlands. Yeah. But yeah, if it's okay according to European law, then yeah,
no investigation.
Yes. And then flash forward 2026. I stumbled upon this matter again because I was visiting a shipyard and I was just looking into what are the conditions, what is the situation. And one of the people working there said that temporary agency works that they work a lot with have become so much more expensive. And I was wondering why that is the situation, because as I recalled, it could be so much cheaper. And so,
do you know what, like when you say cheaper, do you have a rough idea?
Yes. So on average, there has been research on average, temporary agency works are 13% cheaper than normal workers. So I didn't understand, and then I started to look into it. And apparently in 2022, there has been a German case before the European court. And then it was judged that, yes, you can deviate, but only if all taken together, it's more or less, you still get the same amount of money. For instance, if I, as a normal worker, get a bicycle and you get, I don't know, some special holidays, then that is more or less equal.
Okay, so where you first thought like, oh, it's okay that these collective labor agreements deviate from European law, you now saw a German case that made you wonder if that was in fact true.
Yes, and so the German case said, yes, indeed, the European law says equal pay, and yes, you can deviate from it, but taken all together, it shouldn't mean that workers are that much cheaper through collective labor agreements. And then I thought, okay, but that should have a massive impact indeed in the Netherlands as well, because I knew from my earlier investigation, the Netherlands, it was a structural underpayment situation. So then I started looking into it, and then I thought this is a very big story, much bigger than maybe people in the Netherlands understand, because up until that moment, those temporary agencies were like, okay, we will deal with it. We will make a new collective labor agreement and we just take it from there. But I could now substantiate that, we can't just look at the future. We have 14 years of underpayment in the past and in total millions of temporary agency workers that have been underpaid. And that would account for many billions of euros of missed wages. And then I saw that there was this little foundation that was set up, like the Fair Work Foundation. And so they were already also looking into this. And then so we were in touch. And they were already thinking about potentially starting a class action claim to stand up for all people that had been underpaid for so many years.
So before your story, there were already NGOs, institutions that knew what was going on wasn't supposed to happen, but their sort of intention was to make sure it now stops happening, but not to look back into the past.
This foundation was the only one really looking to see how can we get also retrieve some money from previous years, indeed.
So what part of your investigation made that you really made that extra step? Like, hey, this is also about the past 14 years, not just about now.
I think what really made the difference is until that moment, the agencies could pretend like it was not such a strong case.
Which was in their interest to do so, of course.
Of course. And until that moment, no journalist had really fact-checked it. Like, is it a strong case or not? And I was the first to really dive into the material and to really look, what did the court case say? What is the European regulation about? To interview experts about it. So I could really show that it's not just like one opinion against the other. Yeah. It's just about what does the law say.
Did your own legal background also help you in doing this investigation?
It does help a bit, of course, to understand that European law is always stronger than national law, and that you should also always check that. And so they couldn't fool me that much, maybe there.
And do you have a feeling that those agencies, the temporary worker agencies, do you think they knew this was going to come eventually?
No. I have looked thoroughly into this, because if they knew, it also has legal consequences. If they knowingly were underpaying workers for so many years, it would mean that they would have to pay back for all the years that they have been underpaying people. But if they didn't know and they were like in good faith, it's likely that the workers can only claim back wages for the past 5 years. So it has huge legal consequences if we would be able to prove that they knew all these years.
And what's interesting to say is also that your article, in fact, had a huge impact. Let's go to the day when you published this article. What was the day like when you published it?
So it was all over the news that day. We saw that the stocks of Randstad, which is like the big temporary agency firm, that they went down quite a lot that day because
18% I saw.
Yes,
yeah.
It was quite a lot, but it makes sense because this gap, this wage gap, has been a big part of their business model. Because not only a lot of labor migrants, but also a lot of Dutch workers had been affected over the years. I don't know. Maybe you and I think I also worked for a temporary agency when I was a student for some jobs in restaurants and so. So many people have been underpaid in many ways. And
is there even a chance that you and I can also actually get the same?
So for me, it has been way longer than 5 years that I was a student. I don't know about you.
Actually, maybe.
So indeed, it had a lot of impact because a lot of people were also still in the situation that they could rightfully claim back money. And I was very happy that also it was made political. Because the thing is, nobody really likes talking about this topic. Everybody wants to keep it small. Also, because it has been the business model for the Dutch economy. And now, because it made such a huge splash, they couldn't just deny it anymore. They couldn't just ignore it anymore. Now it's in their face. They have to, do something about it, act on it, and they can't just keep on ignoring the temporary agency workers. Yeah. You have to understand that for many decades, temporary agency workers, they weren't properly represented. And this time, we could really show like something is structurally wrong. Mm-hmm. It's not just something we say or see. It's something that's according to the law, according to a judgment. So therefore, I was very happy that this day, people were told like, this is the situation. You can't say anything about it. And also to the workers, like, you are right to indeed make complaints. You are right to step up. There's really something fundamentally wrong with the situation of temporary agency workers in the Netherlands.
That must be a really rewarding feeling to see that your story has such an impact.
It's not that often, especially when you work on EU affairs, that you have a story and actually see impact, yes.
Yeah, and in that sense, I think it's also interesting to see that there was an impact beyond just the Netherlands. I think for your story, you also spoke with Egbert-Jan van Bel, who's the chairman of the NGO we mentioned before, the Fair Work Foundation. Yeah. And I understood that he also spoke on the Polish radio to also inform people who no longer live in the Netherlands about this. So it's also beyond the Netherlands that you're still.
Yes, obviously the biggest population of labor migrants involved is the Polish population. And I also was on the Polish radio and we spoke about the situation. And I'm very happy to see that there's also now a former Polish labor migrant who has already for a few years had this little organization helping his fellow country people to make sure that they receive their rightful pay. And he is now looking into if he has his whole database of clients, if they can all join this class action. So that the case that would maybe one day get to a judge would be very strong and many people would be represented.
So he used to be a labor migrant himself?
Yeah, he would work in, I think, logistics or Albert Heijn, the supermarket, yes.
You also mentioned before no one wants to talk about this issue. What is that like for the labor migrants themselves? Do they want to talk about the problems that they face?
It has been a huge issue in this topic in general, that we know that labor migrants are not very looking to talk about it because they risk, of course, losing their job. They don't have a lot of security. Often also their housing is provided for by their employer. So if they lose their job, they also lose their housing. And also because they feel like, who's going to help us? Nobody really takes us serious. They have been disappointed a lot by the system, by the Dutch legislator, by Dutch unions. And so they don't really feel like stepping forward. They are like, what's in it for me? And I think I understand, because I feel that the Netherlands have been, not treating them honestly, not really listening to their concerns, and have been mostly focused on economic profits more than how we treated these people.
If there's such a part of the Dutch economy that sort of runs on this, well, maybe I think it's fair to use the word exploitation of workers, how does that live within the society?
But it's quite invisible, right? These are people that work behind the scenes, and as long as you don't see them, you don't really have to care about them. And I think that it makes it easy for a lot of people to just ignore the topic. And it only becomes a big topic when we, as Dutch people, see, oh, there are people now living in the streets because they don't have housing anymore. And then it becomes an issue. And then it becomes a problem. But not because the people are ill-treated, but it's because then we see the effects of it and we get the burden of it. And I think it's very cynical, but I'm afraid that's the way it is.
You were talking about that many labor migrants are afraid to speak about this, but also say that they don't really know what's in it for them. But I think in this case, after your article, there's a very clear what's in it for them.
Yeah. So, and we luckily we see that where first 10,000 people had stepped forward and had said to the Fair Work Foundation, like, I think I am also one of the affected people.
So this is 10,000 people before you published your story that already registered themselves with this foundation and said, hey, we might have been affected by this. Yeah.
And then after it doubled. It was 20,000.
Wow.
And I think it's still on the rise. So yes, I think a lot of people were finally made aware of their legal position. Yeah. See often that because of the collective labor agreements being so complex, because people don't know about their rights, because they don't have the money to hire a lawyer. They didn't know what they actually should be earning, and they just said okay to whatever they got.
Mm. And so people that register with this Fair Work Foundation, what exactly do they register for?
So what is happening now is that the Fair Work Foundation is trying to collect as much people as possible to show in a potential court case, like, we really represent a lot of people, and therefore we want to file a class action suit, and then see if we can arrange some kind of big money for all the workers to be compensated.
So that's a settlement between the temporary worker agencies and
the foundation and then to arrange money for the workers. But until now, the agencies, the temporary agencies, haven't showed any, wanting to indeed maybe do a settlement. So it seems that we're heading towards a court case.
Why do you think they don't have that interest in settling?
I think their interest is mainly to drag along and hope that the foundation will just get tired, because they are just also using money of volunteers or family or, other people. It's quite expensive. It will take many years. It's a small initiative. So, I think the temporary agency sector, being very wealthy, hires a lot of expensive lawyers. So I think they are just trying to see if they can just wait it out.
So it's clear from your story that what happened was wrong. But you're not saying that this also guarantees that millions of people will actually get that compensation for all those years of missed payments.
Yeah, that really depends upon, will this case ever make it to court? Will the case be strong enough? Maybe the judge can say, like, yes, you say you represent everyone, but we don't agree with this because it's only, 20,000, 30,000 people, while it's millions of people affected. And so it's quite a complex case in that sense. So even while the law is clear, the outcome may not be so clear.
Yeah, because also those 20, 30,000 people, they're all from different sectors, different countries. So it's also not like a one size fits all approach.
No. Yeah, and everyone has, would have the right to different wages, different compensation. So how do you calculate this? I think it's quite a complex situation.
And were there any people that registered with the Fair Work Foundation as a result of your article that also reached out to you?
Yeah, and so that is also sometimes tricky because, of course, then you get people who email you, and also they will tell you everything that they have experienced, and these are quite harsh stories, and people living on the street, and about how they lost their job because indeed this employer didn't want to live up to their illness or whatever, and just fired them. And then they are living on the street, don't know where to go, don't have money to return to their own country. All these very really heavy stories. And they come to me and like, oh, she knows, she understands, she can help me. But obviously that's I can't do that because I don't know how, but also it's not my job.
And so how do you reflect on your role as a journalist within this story? Where do you think your role ends?
Yeah, so it's not for me, it's not like I tell the story and then I shut the door and the windows and, you can't approach me. And I will always try, indeed, if I get these emails or if somebody calls me to point them out to where they could go. And also I feel like informing is really part of what a journalist does. It is gathering information, writing the story, publishing the story, and also trying to make sure that the story gets across. So it's not only publishing, it's also indeed doing interviews such as these, doing interviews on the radio, explaining how the situation has evolved. Because informing is really the essence of what we do. And especially in this case, temporary agency workers, especially labor migrants, are often quite ill-informed. So I'm very happy to be part of that.
Are there other European countries where this sort of works the same?
Yeah, that's also a big question. Because, of course, it's a European directive. And the Netherlands is not the only country that works a lot with collective labor agreements. I think that maybe for Germany, this issue might also play a role. If I understand what I read correctly, that they have been deviating negatively from the equal pay principle.
In a country like Spain, for example, I think especially in the agricultural sector, they also use a lot of labor migrants. Do you think Spain also has similar issues?
So when we looked into this in 2020, we saw that a lot of labor migrants, especially in the south of Europe, their situation the issue was more illegality. So they were working without any regulation at all, and so they didn't have any certainty at all. So also there was exploitation, and also there the employers made profits at the expense of the labor migrants. But there it was about just illegal employment and not about unethical exploitation. Yeah.
So in a way, similar things happen. It's just in the Netherlands, on paper, there are rules and they're protected, yet still being exploited. And in some other countries, it's just plain illegal.
Yeah, and I feel this is often typical for what happens in the more northern countries. Then on paper, it all looks great. But if you look behind the scenes, it's really unethical. And you see that more often in the south, then indeed it's less regulated. But then there's more illegal situations.
What was the most shocking aspect of this investigation for you?
The most shocking was that everybody seemed to look away. So it was a topic that nobody from left to right, from unions to workers, was very eager to talk about. Everyone was a bit complicit, and at the expense of temporary workers, and that everybody tried to play down that it really were so many workers concerned, so many billions of euros at stake, and still they just didn't want to recognize it, didn't want to see it. Nobody really wants to acknowledge that everybody is a bit complicit and that we really have to look this in the eye and can't just ignore it.
Are you still following up on this topic? Any more stories coming out?
We're looking into it. So especially if indeed the Polish population really starts to become active on this file, they could join the class action case, and that would be a moment for us, of course, to look into it again. We also see that the unions are now, the Dutch unions are really trying to see if there are more cases to be made, and trying to see if there's potentially a court case that they want to be involved in.
And if there's any people listening, either from the Netherlands or from abroad, and they think they might have been affected by this as well, or maybe they know someone that's been affected, what can they do?
So the first step you do is that you write a letter to your agency, and if you can say like, okay, this fellow worker had this bonus, but I didn't, then you can claim back that bonus, right? So you can first do that. You don't need a lawyer. You can always just address your agency. Of course, you can lawyer up. Of course, you can go to that foundation. Of course, you can go to a union. So those are, it's about an employee missing their wages. What would you do? That's the route that you would need to follow.
All right, and then that's where we'll leave it for today's episode. Thank you so much, Lise, for this very interesting conversation. And I look forward to seeing your follow-up stories on this.
Thank you.
You've listened to the podcast of Follow the Money. Our watchdog journalism is funded by our members. Subscribe and support European investigative journalism.